Welcome to It Is Written Canada. Thank you for joining us. Did you know that the Bible has a lot to say about money? In fact, there are over 2,350 verses that talk about money. That's twice as many as the number of verses that speak about faith and prayer combined. 15% of everything Jesus said was on the topic of money. For example, out of the 38 parables Jesus told, 16 deal with money, and 1 out of 7 verses in the first 3 Gospels speaks about money. In fact, Jesus spoke more about money and possessions than he did about heaven and hell combined.
Today on It Is Written Canada, our special guest is Sven Tornlov, who is going to share with us his wisdom on saving for the future or investing, and how the Bible gives us direction when it comes to investing. When it comes to finances, Sven is a person we really trust. Sven is the Associate Treasurer and Planned Giving Director of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the British Columbia and Yukon Conference. He has a bachelor's degree in Business Administration from Walla Walla University.
Sven, welcome to It Is Written Canada. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Sven, when we speak about saving for the future, we're talking about investing, right? And what does the Bible say about investing?
I'm glad you asked that question because one of my favorite verses in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes 10 verses 19, and maybe we'll unpack this. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. Can this be right?
Well, it's right in the sense of material things. So money is our currency of exchange, it's a way of trading. And so, yeah, it can answer everything in terms of material things. But in terms of our spiritual wealth, our spiritual, answers questions, that money's not the answer to everything. Obviously not.
Okay. So I agree, for sure.
Yeah, so when we're talking here about investing for the future financially, can you give us some basic tips to keep in mind when we're thinking of investing for the future? Before we do that, what would you say that we should keep in mind?
You know, so many people, when they talk about investing for the future and investments and a portfolio, I mean, we see dollar signs, right? That's what we see, and we get excited about, if I put away this much per year, this much per month, when I'm 65, when I'm 70, I'm going to have this much. And sometimes in the equation to get from what we put in every month to what we're going to have to when we're 65 is we adjust the interest rate factor. And so we are, if 5% doesn't get us to the number we need, we throw in 6% or 7%. 8%, to get that big number when we're going to retire. And I think that we could be deceiving ourselves because where we should be doing an evaluation for risk. How much risk am I really willing to put my money in when I'm looking for my future? Because when I'm retired, I am no longer in my working years. So I have to be wise about my investment. So I feel that if we do a risk assessment, as opposed to looking at how much interest my investment is going to earn, we're going to be in a much better position when we are ready to retire.
So different people are prepared to take different kinds of risks when it comes to investing.
Yes, different types of risk, and also depending on where you are at. If you're between the ages of 20, 30 and 40, there's a much longer period before you're 65. But when you're 55 or 60, you need to be reducing that risk within your portfolio. So I think it really depends where you are at, how old you are, where you're at in your working years as to your level of risk.
Sven, sometimes we get so worried about saving and we just want to keep everything and hoard everything. Can you tell us a little bit about hoarding?
You know, I think we just have to drive through a subdivision, and we don't even have to look in people's homes, but for some reason we all have garages, but none of us park in them. Why is that? Is it because they're so full of stuff? So are we all hoarding to a certain extent? You know, maybe. And I think it transitions our trust in God, our faith in God, into ourselves and into our own merit and what we have. And we might be looking at our neighbor and saying, we have more than our neighbor, you know, with all of these material things. And where that really shouldn't be our goal, and that shouldn't be where our level of satisfaction and self-actualization comes from.
So we're not talking about hoarding in the sense that that's going to protect us from the future, to have more things.
There are different stories and verses in the Bible that talk about budgeting and giving. You know, we read about the woman that gave 2 mites, and everyone was looking at her and thinking, wow, like that's really little. But in her heart, and Jesus knew as well, like that was all that she had. So when it comes to budgeting too, you know, we can't look at others and see how much they're giving or how much they're saving. Everyone's situation is different. And we even see too in the story of Joseph, you know, he knew that there was going to be 7 good years where they were going to harvest a lot, but he also knew that there was going to be 7 years of famine as well. You know, God blessed him knowing that that was going to come, and he was able to save for the people. And in the end, you know, like so many people became better off because of that. He saved so many lives through listening to God's guidance with that. Yes, I don't think, you know, oftentimes we're going to know exactly what's going to come, right? But just be prepared for things like that could happen. Sometimes an extra medical situation could arise that you have to pay something out of pocket, or God forbid you get into a car accident. You know, some of these things you just can't control. But by having a budget and setting money aside, instead of now being completely stressed, not knowing where to get these funds from, you've prepared for the future, knowing that, okay, even though this bad thing has happened to me, and even though I didn't see this coming, through the help of God, I've been able to put something aside, and now it's not going to cause too much harm to me or my family or to my loved ones, those that are affected by our finances.
So planning for the future, I've also heard financial planners talk about emergency fund, having an emergency fund. What does an emergency fund look like? How much should it be? And what's the purpose of it?
Good. So right in the name, it gives us a hint. An emergency fund, okay? So there's an emergency. I need those funds now. You know, not next month, now. So a good place to have those monies is going to be in a high interest savings account, or maybe in a tax-free savings account. But if it's in the TFSA, not invested in a way where it's locked in, somewhere where you can receive that out, you know, within 24 hours. And so when I think of emergency fund, I want to look at risk. How much risk do I have on my income, and how much risk do I have on my expenses? So looking at income, have I been working for the same company for 20 years? Am I on salary? Or have I just started a new job? Or am I self-employed? So if I'm self-employed, I am going to carry a lot more risk on my income side. It's not steady. But if I work for the same company for 20 years and I'm on salary, it's probably a lot more secure. So if it's not as secure, maybe that pushes me closer to the 6-month side. If it's very secure, maybe closer to the 3-month side if it's being static. Looking at my expense side, if I rent, okay, I don't carry much liability. And so, because if the fridge dies, who pays for it?
The landlord.
The landlord, not me, right? But conversely, if I own, if the fridge dies, who pays for it?
You do.
I do, you see? And so I carry much more liability when I own. And what happens if I have a rental suite? If I have a rental suite, all of a sudden now I have 2 stoves, 2 fridges. You know, I double my appliances. And I have obligation as a landlord now to my tenant to be able to replace things very, very quickly. And so that's going to move me, if I own, more to the 6-month side, and if I have a rental suite or a carriage home, maybe more even into the 9 months, where I'm going to have 9 months or 6 months or 3 months, depending on where your liability sits on your income and expense side, to have that sitting as cash readily available to pay for an emergency.
That's a lot of money. So you're slowly building up this emergency fund. So we're not saying it's a fixed amount of $1,000. We're talking about whatever you would make in that 6-month period, you should have that in savings ready in case there's an emergency.
That's right. And there are a number of ways to get there. And you're not going to get there this month. You might not get there this year, but over a number of years, you will get there. And when you start out in life, you're finished school and you start out, maybe you're going to start renting, right? So now maybe you're just having the 3 months of expenses. And then when you buy your first home after you've rented for 3 or 4 years, so now you're only moving from zero, having no emergency fund, to having 3 months. Now you're moving from 3 months to 6 months. So you're not making that giant leap all at one time. And a great catalyst for starting your emergency fund is your tax return. If you get a tax return, that can be the catalyst to start your emergency fund.
That's a great idea.
Very good idea.
Sven, you've just shared with us about an emergency fund. Can you tell us about a fund for future needs?
Sure. I mean, I define future needs as myself as a one-time purchase of $500 or more. So examples of this would be buying tires for my vehicle, putting a new roof on my house. And I know that if I need a new set of tires in 3 years, let's just use easy math. Let's say tires cost $900. Divide that by 3 years, it's going to be $300. Divide that by 12 is going to be $25 a month. Okay? So now I need to set aside $25 a month for my tires. I know that in 10 years, I'm going to need to put a new roof on my house. Let's say it's $12,000 for easy math. Divided by 10, so you get $1,200. Divide that by 12 months, that's going to be $100. So now, just taking those two things, I need to set aside $125 every month. And then in 3 years, I'll have my $900. We're pretty good at managing, static income, static expenses. Everything is pretty much the same. We pretty much use the same amount of gas every month. Food costs the same pretty much every month. Your gas bill is annualized. All of these items, but all of a sudden you get hit with new tires for your vehicle, $900. Well, you can only water down the soup a few times. And then it's not a joy to eat anymore. And so that's what's hard to manage. So if you have this emergency fund, not the emergency fund, your future needs fund, you have the dollars sitting there. So you take the $900 out and you buy your new tires. And that way you don't have to scrimp. You can buy good tires, for your vehicle. When you need a new roof for your house, it's not stressful. It's not this big stress time. How am I going to pay for my new roof? You use plastic. You use plastic. And then you try to pay it off. And if you don't pay it off, you end up paying interest for it.
When it comes to planning for the future, there are different items that different people want to save for. It could be a car, it could be a house, it could be wanting to pay for a vacation, it could be maybe a really big birthday party that you want to throw for your child when they turn 16 or when they turn 18, right? There's lots of expenses that are out there. It's really just dependent on what you love to do, what you love to spend on. Some people really prioritize date nights as a couple, and spending a lot there. But when it comes to saving, you just have to really think about your wants versus your needs. And I put such a strong emphasis on this because it can be very easy to merge the two together and to tell ourselves that something is a need when it really isn't. So there's actually something that has kind of blown up on social media lately. It's called girl math. So with girl math, there's this thought that, okay, if I'm spending cash, I'm technically not spending money because it's not lowering the number on my bank account. Or if I bought something and I returned it, now I have this refunded money. So that's money I would have spent anyway. So it doesn't count if I spend it again. So you just have to really steer away from these ideas about, okay, I'm spending something that's on sale. I'm saving money. No, that money is still coming out, right? So you just have to ground yourself when it comes to your spending and really look into saving and investing specifically. Saving is great and investing is great as well. Save for the rainy day. They say that, if an emergency comes up, or by any chance maybe you lost your job, you should have savings for around 3 to 6 months that can cover your living expenses if you were to lose your job. So keep that in mind as well when you're doing a budget, to have money set aside in the case that, God forbid, you lose your job.
And most employers, you can set it up that they will put this money into a separate account or into a TFSA right off of your paycheck. So out of sight, out of mind. And this just grows because you've taken the time to calculate and figure out, what are my future needs going to be? My family, we want to go to Hawaii, let's say in 3 years. What is that going to cost? Start setting it aside monthly.
That takes a lot of discipline. And I think a lot of people, they look at this and they say, wow, I really want that. Well, if you want that and that's a value to you, then you're going to have to be disciplined. And when you get that discipline, you are free, right?
You are, and it does take discipline, but especially when your employer can take it off of your paycheck, every pay, out of sight, out of mind. You do the calculations once a year, and then you go down to your employer, take that money off. Taking off $120, $150, maybe $200 every month is significantly easier than being saddled with needing a new roof, $12,000. How am I going to do that? Home equity line of credit. That's a lot of places where people turn. And then they're paying interest on it.
Sven, you mentioned future needs. Can you tell us a little bit about, future needs as far as our children's education and also as far as retirement is concerned?
So your children's future education, that is a biggie. I think that 99% of us would agree that we want our child to do something in education beyond grade 12, whether that's at a trade school, becoming a Red SEAL in some area, or going to a 4-year degree, a bachelor's or a science degree. So how do I do that? Well, if you look into an RESP, the government has significant incentives to really grow the amount of money that you have in that investment. So I would strongly suggest that you go down to your local financial institution or Google and learn about an RESP and start it today. Make your appointment at the bank and then research on how you're going to do it, because that's how powerful it is, an RESP.
What does that stand for?
Registered Educational Savings Plan.
Okay.
Okay, so then in retirement, let's talk about retirement. That's an RRSP, which we might be a lot more familiar with, a Registered Retirement Savings Plan. And there are a number of schools of thought around retirement, your own retirement, because you have such a long period in which you are investing for it, and hopefully equally as long period that you're going to be able to enjoy it in retirement. But it cannot be our sole focus, that we are just driving all of our extra dollars into our retirement, because we also need to enjoy our working years. We only have so much time to enjoy our children being in elementary. Only so much time that they're going to be in their teen years, and pretty soon they're gone. So if we don't enjoy those times either to bolster the family unit, to keep our marriage going strong, we still need to take care of that. But in looking at our retirement, we do have a long period of time. Hopefully we have a long period of time, because we're going to start, if we haven't started, we're going to start today. Okay? We're going to start today. So you need to, in retirement, have some tax deferred growth, which is probably going to be into an RRSP, but also you're going to need to have some that has already been taxed. So that when you're in retirement, and you need to talk to a strategist, a professional financial advisor on this, but when you are retired, your money that is tax deferred, you will probably set that up so it's a monthly payment that's coming out. so that you don't get hit with these large tax burden in a single year in retirement. But if you have, like let's say in retirement, you need a new roof, or you want to go on a holiday, or you need to pull out a chunk of money, you have a chunk of money set aside which has already been taxed. And that's probably going to be invested in a TFSA, a tax-free savings account.
Let me give you an example. This came from a professor at MIT in the States. And as far as visualizing the power of compounding, if you could take Fenway Park and make it watertight, and you had a magic eyedropper where it would start with one drop, and then it would double, and then double again, and then double again. If you were sitting up on the top tier of the stadium, how long would it take to fill up the entire stadium with water? And everybody's always wrong. If you then also ask the question, how long would it take for there to be 6 feet of water in the stadium? The answer to that is 40 minutes. The amount of time to go from 6 feet to the top stadium seat, 45. Why? Because remember, every drop that's coming out is doubling. So when it's small, it's like, yeah, this isn't doing anything. This is going to take forever. But once it starts to build, it gets big fast. And that's what we miss about debt when we're paying someone else. We're putting money in someone else's pocket versus if we had kept it and put it to work, what it could be doing for us.
This is very good. So we're talking about balancing all of our finances and our financial needs and seeing the big picture of what we need now in the present term, and not all hoarding it for later. Sort of like the guy in the Bible who has a big barn, but he wants to build a bigger barn because he has a big harvest. And he just hoards and hoards and hoards, and he just sits back and he says, well, now I don't have to worry about anything. And he forgets about God. And the Lord says, well, you're a fool, because your life could be required of you today. So we don't know when that's going to happen. So we can plan for the future, but also live in the present. Yeah, very important in terms of all of this.
Sven, could you please give us some timeless rules for investing?
Sure, let's go back to the Bible and look up in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 20. There is desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. So when we think about investing, we need to realize that this is going to be a work of a lifetime. It's systematically, every month, every paycheck for all of your working years. So that, when we're retired, we are not a burden on anyone, and we are still able to be generous with others and still being able to help when people need help. So we need to realize that it is just as vital as sleeping, as eating, a very systematic approach. This is where the tortoise wins the race.
Yeah, very good advice. I'm going to ask you to pray. I'm just thinking in terms of money as being comparable to something. I like to compare it to seed, right? Some of it you can use, maybe it's wheat seeds. Some of it you can replant, and then it can grow again. That would be savings. And some of it you have to eat. And so some of it you have to spend on our current needs right now. And maybe someone is listening to us right now and they're thinking, I haven't saved enough. And I'm in a real tight spot right now, and I'm listening to this program and I realize I have some future needs. I have a present need and I haven't saved enough. Maybe they're in their closer to their retirement years and they're worried. Maybe you can pray for them right now that God will give them wisdom to trust Him, that He will provide for their needs, but also trust Him to see a strategy for making the right decisions.
Sure, let's bow our heads. Dear Father, I want to thank you for the love and grace that you have given to us, Lord, and that you have given us wisdom, Father. And Lord, I would like to pray for all of those who are thinking about their future needs. And Lord, if they are struggling with that, give them energy to be systematic in that approach. And if they feel that they have are in retirement years, Lord, they have such a tremendous asset to pass on to the younger generation to help them through the mistakes that they might have made, Lord. So please grant us wisdom. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Sven, thank you so much for joining us on It Is Written Canada today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Friends, our free offer is a little booklet entitled The Windows of Heaven.
The Windows of Heaven contains inspiring true stories and promises from the Bible of how God will provide for all who put their trust in Him.
Before you go, we would like to thank all of you who have supported the ministry of It Is Written Canada with your prayers and financial contributions.
Yes, thank you. And we would also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel and also listen to our podcasts. And if you go to our website, you can see our latest programs.
Friends, if you want the kind of wisdom that God longs to give you, even in the financial areas of your life, we would recommend you open the Bible, where it is recorded that Jesus found His assurance to defeat the devil through the word of His Father when He declared, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God."